Recording, it's recording. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Grammar School. It is week 2 of Hoboken Public Library's Raise Your Voice, a free online writing class. I am your host for all 4 weeks, Diane Rubino, and I teach writing at NYU. And this week we have with us Edith Updike. She's on the upper left. Yep, they're waving her hand.
Hi, Edith.
She is a writer and editor and longtime teacher. And today we're super lucky because she's going to have us talk about great beginnings as well as editing, because those are two super important points. So what exactly do you mean by great beginnings, Edith?
Yeah, so first, I'm glad you started with this one and not the one about editing process, because even though it's really valuable, process is super not sexy and it doesn't capture anyone's attention. And this is really what, I sort of mean about a great beginning, what we call a lead in journalism. And you have it kind of in lots of different settings, the same thing, which is you have a couple of minutes, seconds, not minutes, seconds at the beginning of something to capture somebody's attention, and not just to, get their eyeballs on your words, but to really let the meaning kind of penetrate their brain. You really have to draw them into your story, right? And that's what a really good lead does. It draws you into the story, and there are kind of different ways of doing it. In journalism, let's start with the kind of basic one, your news story, right? When you write a lead for a news story, you don't have to do anything tricky or sexy. You don't have to add character or color, because it's like a bomb went off in Washington, D.C. this morning. You don't have to do anything special to make that exciting or, to draw someone's attention in. When you get more towards features or personal things, you have to maybe make a little bit more effort. And I think it's extra important now. It's always been really meaningful, kind of how you get started. But now more than ever, because there's so much content competing for attention, that it's really easy for people to kind of mentally, and I'm going to show how wrong am I swiping in the right direction? Swipe left or swipe, whichever the one is the rejection swipe, right? Kind of mentally not let the information really be absorbed. So it's an important thing to kind of do well. And if you do the opening of something well, your audience will forgive you for a good long while. You kind of get your reader, or this is in comedy and speech making and everything, you get your audience kind of on board with you for the ride that you're going to take. And there are all kinds of different ways, to do that, to get people's attention. So, I mean, Diane, what do you see? I mean, let's talk about some of the things that we see put, let's say, in headlines to get people's attention because they're interesting to sort of humans generally.
Well, I think in kind of in a partisan environment, I'm looking for something political, preferably that the Democrats have done something really positive and were able to achieve something. A lot of my, I would say, news consumption is around the body politic.
But within the context of reading about politics, reading about anything, what draws you to a story, any story? Because we're really talking about universal qualities of story that draw people in.
Is it important to me?
Right. Is something relevant to me?
That's usually, and it's all about if I care about it or not.
Right. And sometimes somebody can make you care, like celebrity, right? You can bring in a celebrity. That's something that people engage with. They feel like they know that person. What about conflict?
Lenore, what about conflict?
I was thinking that's not really what draws me in, conflict or drama. I look for something personal. So I don't like to read about celebrities or whether movies or television or sports, but I do like to read about health-related items, and I like to read about people's personal stories about how they've encountered a health situation and handled that. So I look for something to strike me that's personal,
Mhm.
presented as a personal piece of writing.
As a way of bringing the subject matter sort of to life.
Yes,
Right.
to life for me. Yes.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Good. Good. So you guys brought some examples. Diane, you said you had an example or two.
I have a number of examples. I'm speaking particularly to Lenore because this is about health. It's The Goldfish Went on Vacation is the book, and it's a memoir of loss is the subtitle. And the opening line is, in the 3 days after our trip to the sheep farm, Willem's personality began to change. So I really like that. Should I keep going or just
I don't think you like right there. You see a lot of the components of story emerging, and change is conflict. Sometimes the word conflict has a negative connotation, but in storytelling, conflict is always what sort of drives the story forward. So conflict is really necessary. So yeah, you can definitely, it puts you in that moment. But then there's a kind of thing, this is something comes next, right? That kind of draws you or pulls you towards the next thing.
Well, I think also in this case, in the 3 days after our trip to the sheep farm, that sheep farm got my attention, as well as, personality began to change. That's something big, that there's an issue here.
Maybe connected to the sheep farm. What's that
I
about?
got bitten by sheep.
Right?
Yeah, true.
Or
True.
started to feel bad about wool, or many other options. How about you, Lenore? Did you have one in mind that besides you mentioned Charles Dickens earlier?
Yes.
Definitely.
But I found another one that I liked. It's the first opening line of The Catcher in the Rye, which I read in high school, but reread in my adult years and liked it much better as an adult. And it says, if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. And that makes me wonder, if I hadn't read the book, who is this person that just kind of putting that sort of attitude right out there in the first line of the story would make me curious to want to know more and read more about this person.
Both because of what's in the story, like there's you get a little peek of the story, right? Lousy childhood, but also you get a really deep look at this character. You really hear that voice in a very powerful way. Yeah. It's very moving. Do you guys have a couple others you want to share?
I certainly do. And I wanted to pick a variety of sources because just goes to show you that you can be talking about anything and can be interesting. This is Developing Critical Thinkers. It's for teachers, but the opening line is, learning to think critically is one of the most significant activities of adult life. That's a very powerful and strong statement. He's unequivocal in his statement.
It's very direct, it's very bold, and you bring up a really important point as far as the writing goes, which is that good leads don't need to be gimmicky, right? You're not looking for a trick. You don't have to tell an elaborate story, right? Sometimes the best ones, some of my personal favorites, and this is because I come from a journalism tradition, are the one-liners, are the really good one-liners that really encapsulate a story really well, so that you know what you're going to get and you're really interested to keep reading.
So I was reading a book written by a palliative care physician. And then the first line of the book she says that she said, I was 5 years old when my father told me that life is temporary. And that kind of struck me because that's a huge truth that many 5-year-olds would not hear. It seems to me when we talk about life and death with children, we're careful about, we might use the goldfish analogy, like in the book that Diane showed, that picture of the goldfish. But here was a father speaking to his daughter, not knowing that she was going to wind up being a palliative care physician. And he places this thought into her head at such a young age about life, and it's being kind of fragile and temporary. And I just thought that was an interesting start to a very fascinating book that I'm in the process of reading.
And I will say it is no accident that we've now heard a couple of these that we've pulled out as to look at that involve talking about the parent-child relationship. And because that, again, is so powerful to humans, to all humans, right? In sort of tapping into these universal story tropes. And that's one of the deepest ones, right? When you're reading a book that you're hearing an adult voice, and the adult voice is talking about childhood. So you know that somehow that means Big Mojo. And as you say, there's part of that that's built into the text right there. So yeah, very nice, very nice.
I have more. You want more or
Well,
not?
let me share a couple of mine. I
Okay.
want to show, because I
Okay,
have a little
okay,
bit of
yep.
variety, and I have a couple of things to point out.
Okay.
So I'm going to share my screen for a minute because to let people read them and basically experience them. So this is from a news story. Many Americans waiting on the third round of stimulus checks may find their payments going to debt collectors instead.
Whoa.
Whoa, right? That would make you keep going if you had any kind of nickel in that quarter, so to speak, right? And you can see that even though it's very factual, it's very sort of grounded in the facts of the news, it really homes in on the kind of visceral part of this. The use of the word find implies there's an unpleasant surprise, which is part of what you uncover here. Verbs are always, I talk about this all the time in writing classes. Verbs are the engines of your sentence, and if you use good verbs, you really do yourself a huge favor, because you can really sort of make your writing a lot better, proportional to how much work you put in. Okay, here's another one. As if we needed another reminder to keep our eyes on the road, a herd of deer in rural Oakland County, Michigan demonstrates just how havoc can be wreaked in a split second. And this falls into the category of what I call a kind of serviceable lead. It is not, it's kind of cute. It sort of gives you a little bit of flavor, like there's a little bit of salt on top of the dish. But it's mostly kind of factual, and it tells you what you're going to get. And it's really important to think about this kind of thing when you get stuck getting started, right? Sometimes we really get stuck because we're looking for that perfect lead and we can't. So throw down one that's really kind of upfront and basic and puts down the main idea, and keep going. And then after you're done, you can come back to it. And sometimes in the writing, you found the thing along the way. It's sort of been pulled out of you by that writing process, the thing that really belongs up at the top because it symbolizes the story.
But then there's also the universal of how havoc can be wreaked in a split second. We can all empathize and understand that.
Yes. There's a big service component here, right? This is a story that's going to give you information that's useful in your life and keeping you, safe and healthy, as opposed to here's something that's just interesting. Is this next one? Okay. So I was looking for a couple of opinion ones and some fresh things. So I thought I would, excuse me, throw a very recent one in. I'll give you a minute to read it and then I'll read it.
Oh, boy.
Mm.
So let me just read it for anyone who's listening and doesn't have the screen up. Today, just hours before New York Governor Andrew Cuomo held an obscene press conference to read COVID statistics and call his former employees politically motivated liars, a pair of stories provided some of the most detailed accounts of his office's culture to date. In interviews with 40-odd people who have worked for the governor over the years, reporters at the New York Times and New York Magazine describe a tangle of offenses in a political scene described as a, quote, seedy adults summer camp, close quote, where employees of all genders are bullied and belittled and women are recruited to sit around and look hot. So, I mean, what do you ladies think of this particular opening?
I might not want to read anymore.
Because
that might have been like enough for me to feel a little bit uncomfortable, to kind of make an assessment of where this is going, and feel like that's enough information for me at this time.
Diane, what do you think?
Well, I think that this idea of commonality, that people are bullied and belittled, I think that resonates with a lot of people now. I mean, maybe in the past we didn't talk about as workplace bullying before, and of course, women whose they're visual add-ons. They're not recruited for being intelligent, although intelligent women can be hot too. It's not where this is going. And of course, an obscene press conference. Like, what does that mean? That drew me in too. Like, what's happening?
So, but I think that's probably, Lenore, one of the things that turned you off, right? The use of the word obscene.
Kind of like it just, there's nothing in there that would make me want to read more. And then whether it's that or what the New York Magazine and the New York Times describe, it's somewhat horrifying to me. And I know that it's going on right now, and it's current news. But just again, reading that paragraph, there's enough words in there that I would not want to read anymore.
And that's fine. I mean, that's the thing to remember, is that not every piece of writing is for everybody. And if this one in particular, you can see it takes a very clear point of view. It's very upfront about not only what it's going to say, but how it's going to say it. It's a little bit, funnily enough, like The Catcher in the Rye.
That's what I was thinking too when you were reading it. Yes.
Right? That you really hear
Yep.
the voice of the author, and you've decided you don't want to have a chat with this person. Right?
But it's funny because The Catcher in the Rye, I would want to read more, but this, I'm not sure why. I see a similarity, but it's not,
right.
It actually turns me off instead of pulling me in.
Right.
But it also has given you a ton of information already.
Right.
I mean, you get you know what's going to happen in the rest of the story. Elaboration on that. So that's a really good lead, because it tells you everything you need to know.
You really could walk away and go, okay, mentally I can sort of fill that in well enough, and thank you very much. Life is crappy enough. I don't need to hear anything about that. I totally, but again, so there's this technique, which is in both of these, which is not to write it as if this is just the facts, but to take a stand, to let the voice of the author really be part of either the appeal or not. of a particular piece, right?
Yeah.
So let me try another one. Oh, here you go. This is a little bit similar. So the headline of this is "The whitest family on earth assures everyone that they are definitely not racist." And the lead is the royal family has recovered from the aftershock of the interview and has emerged ready to apply a heavily charged defibrillator to their reputation. Although, are they even aware of what their reputation has been for the last 100 years, give or take? So same kind of thing, you know what you're going to talk about, and you know the kind of voice, the attitude, the point of view that you're going to get from the author.
It sounds like an opinion piece. It sounds like a news story.
Yes, they're both opinion pieces. They're absolutely both
Okay.
opinion pieces. Yeah, because you mentioned people were going to do more, and I went and found some memoir bits too because we wanted to. Okay, now we're going to come to one of my favorite leads in like the history of ever. And I'm just going to give it to you first in small pieces. So this is the very beginning. There are many incompetent people in the world. Dr. David A. Dunning is haunted by the fear he might be one of them. So, interesting. First of all, there are many incompetent people in the world. Yes, we've all experienced that. We've certainly all felt irritation at, whether everyone's more or less incompetent, we've all felt that feeling at one point. And here's this guy, doctor, so he's probably kind of smart, maybe. And he's afraid he might be an idiot. So it kind of, for me, it draws me right to the next bit. Dr. Dunning, a professor of psychology at Cornell, worries about this because, according to his research, most incompetent people do not know that they are incompetent. Again, it just adds another layer of information. This sort of each layer of this gets more interesting. On the contrary, people who do these things badly, Dr. Dunning has found in studies conducted with a graduate student, Justin Kruger, are usually supremely confident of their abilities, more confident, in fact, than people who do things well. I love this because it draws me, each piece of it draws me to the next people. Each piece has a little bit of a mystery in it, but also has a little bit of a revelation in it as well. And there's such a wonderful lightheartedness to it because, remember, this is a story that kind of says, boy, a lot of people are idiots. And that can be a very nasty story. And this story really kind of handles the whole thing with this very light touch, this very self-deprecating attitude, which I gather is that of the professor as well.
Definitely that he's haunted by the fear that he might be incompetent. I mean, that's, he's really human, and you want to know more about someone who's human and doubting. I think the nature of being a human is is doubting yourself.
Okay, now I picked out a couple of fictions. So here's one from The Gift of the Magi. And this, I picked some of these fiction out. I'm usually, when I'm teaching writing, it's either journalism or business oriented. And I was really thinking in terms of memoir and fiction and more lyrical forms of prose. So I pulled this out. It's the beginning of The Gift of the Magi. $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There's almost a whole story just by itself in that paragraph, right? And that idea at the beginning, okay, $1, that was all, and it's in pennies, and then the way that she gets the pennies, the close dealing, right? all of that pulls you into the drama. It helps you understand the character you're being introduced.
Mhm.
You see the conflict that's coming, right?
And you're
Christmas.
right that that one paragraph could be it, and the next day would be Christmas, and you'd be like, and you already know she's in trouble.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you have it.
Right. All right. Let me do another quick one here. So this is a more recent story, a jury of her peers. When Martha Hale opened the storm door and got a cut of the north wind, she ran back for her big woolen scarf. As she hurriedly wound that round her head, her eye made a scandalized sweep of her kitchen. It was no ordinary thing that called her away. It was probably further from ordinary than anything that had ever happened in Dixon County. But what her eye took in was that her kitchen was in no shape for leaving. Her bread all ready for mixing. Half the flour sifted and half unsifted. What happened?
Yeah.
What's next? I don't know.
Mhm.
Let's keep reading.
I like
Right?
the
Mhm.
scandalized sweep.
Mhm.
Yeah, little words like that. And again, the way, and you can see here that there's a sentence that says, she rushed or she was unnerved. They kind of describe the scene without telling you exactly what she's feeling, and you can kind of figure it out, right?
Mhm.
She's distressed at leaving her bread and
Mhm.
the unordinariness. All right. I'm going to skip that one. So this is more in the kind of memoir mode. It's Toni Morrison. The headline is "No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear. In times of dread, artists must never choose to remain silent." Christmas, the day after, in 2004, following the presidential re-election of George W. Bush, I'm staring out of the window in an extremely dark mood, feeling helpless. Then a friend, a fellow artist, calls to wish me happy holidays. He asks, "How are you?" And instead of, "Oh, fine, and you?" I blurt out the truth. "Not well. Not only am I depressed, I can't seem to work, to write. It's as though I'm paralyzed, unable to write anything more in the novel I've begun. I've never felt this way before. But the election," and I'm about to explain with further detail when he interrupts, shouting, "No, no, no. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. Not when everything is fine, but in times of dread. That's our job."
Hmm.
So this was Toni Morrison's kind of piece about,
Hmm.
how she responded to what I think some people have been feeling in recent years in
Mm.
various ways.
Hmm.
What do you guys think?
I'm interested in her friend's response when he said, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work, not when everything is fine, but in times of dread. That's our job." I'd like to know more. Like, what are the next couple of lines saying? And
You're gonna have to look it up after the show.
Edith, should we jump over to editing, or do you want to wrap this up?
Oh, yeah. So we can wrap this up. So I had a couple of others. Yeah, that was fine. That was fine. Yeah, let's wrap this up. So if people are thinking about, memoir, just think about trying to condense, a little memory. I mean, we're going to talk in a minute about kind of how to go through the whole process, but what is your idea about, and what is a little piece, and it has to be a really small piece, otherwise you get bogged down in the details, that really illustrates or highlights or kind of brings out the most compelling parts of what the story is. And with that, I'll kind of stop that part and ask if anyone has any questions or comments or other anything else they wanted to add on what we said so far.
I think the question I have leads into the next part is like, how do you write such a great lead, or a great first line?
Mm.
Mhm.
So let's do the next part but ask that question again at the end, because I do have a couple of different answers. So the thing I want to talk about now, it's like I said, it's not the sexiest part, but in a way it's the most useful. And I want to talk about editing process. And really good writers, great writers, they're not great writers because they're great writers. It's because they know how to edit themselves. They're capable of editing themselves. And editing yourself can happen in many different ways. It can happen that you write a draft and you put it away and then you pull it out again and you sort of try to go through it fresh, as an outside editor would. It can also take place in your head while you're working. And the more experience you get, the better you get. Anyone who writes and wants to get better as a writer, I strongly recommend you find a writing buddy whom you trust and respect, and you edit each other's work, because you will learn about yourself from editing other people, and that will advance you in ways that you won't be able to advance on your own. But I wanted to just talk about what a really kind of healthy editing process looks like. And they're like, I don't know, 5 or 7 steps. I'm going to go through them one at a time. And every time I do this, I do corporate classes. Every time I do that in a setting, people go, gosh, we don't have time for all that. But the time, it doesn't take a lot of time, right? It isn't that you have to do it 7 different steps on 7 different occasions, and each one has to take 15 or 20 minutes, an hour. In some cases, you can do it in your head, in 5 minutes. If it's a really short piece, it's sort of all taking place in your head, if you're experienced like I am. So the first step is planning. And this is something that book authors do with their agents, journalists do, magazine journalists do with their magazine editors and newspapers, is talk through the idea. What are we going to say? And how are we going to say it? What are the pieces that we're going to need? Are we going to marshal a lot of statistical data in support of what we're trying to say? Are we going to bring in a lot of anecdotes about individual people? Or are we going to have a lot of quotes? Are we going to have a lot of people telling stories in their own words? And really thinking at the beginning about, again, what is it that I'm trying to say here? Who's my message for? What is it I want to say? Who do I want to say it to? And then thinking about, again, the components that are going to have the most impact to the audience. And then you go and you gather the materials. And, again, sometimes the materials are all in your head already. And sometimes you have to go out and do interviews or dig up data or find citations in books. There are lots of different approaches. So then you gather your materials and you do a draft. And again, I talk about this as a process with an external editor, because when you do this for yourself, you kind of have to take on that mental role. When you get a draft, when I get a draft as a journalist, as a magazine editor, my first question is, are all the pieces there? And the reason that's my first question is it's probably going to take time. If they're missing pieces, it takes time to get missing pieces. So I want to get the reporter on that task if that's not there. And I don't want to try and build a structure with a big hole in the middle. So that's the first question. And, if it's a personal memoir, let's say, and you're trying to tell something about your life, have you said everything that you wanted to say about it? Have you been able to raise all of the key issues in a way that they come through for the reader and have meaning for the reader? So step 1, do I have all the pieces there? And then step 2 is, if I have all the pieces, are they in the right order, right? Is there a logical structure? Does it flow? Is it easy to follow? And then 3, and part of the reason that you do that first, you do those 2 steps first, is that you want to cut out things that don't belong, because you can waste a lot of time rewriting paragraphs that you end up having to cut entirely. So it's better to sort of get the part that you really want, kind of put it all together, and then you start to refine language. Do the transitions from one paragraph to another flow smoothly? Do I have all the right verbs that I want? Am I using really my best word choices? Have I presented the anecdotes? Have I set them? You sort of want to set your anecdotes like a gem in a setting. It has to be well placed in order to really look beautiful, to come through with power. So have I done those things? And then at the very end, you have proofing, and proofing has to be done by somebody else. And it has to be done by somebody else because as a matter of neuroscience, you cannot proof something that you've read more than once, because your mind will fill in the gaps. Your mind will put in things that aren't there. You do not see it fresh. So proofing always has to be done by someone who's completely fresh, which when you have an editing buddy, they come in handy yet a second time. So this is again the kind of the full process. And as I say, there are these different steps, but you don't have to do them kind of over many days or many hours. My point is only in terms of the order in which you tackle things, that you don't want to, agonize over the phrasing and the word choice and the poetic beauty of a sentence that's not going to be in the final draft. So having kind of irked that big long explanation out there at you, I would certainly welcome any questions about process and about how you can apply some things to your own work or anything else.
Well, I love the idea of talking things through. Do you think it would work if I like just talked it into a tape recorder or my trusty phone voice recorder?
That's the sort of thing that doesn't hurt. It's almost like outlining, but audio outlining. The downside of that, I guess, is that when you talk to another person, they hear things that you don't know you're saying, and point them out to you. And that's part of what you get from kind of banging ideas around and honing, and you're refining your idea. Remember, when you're writing, you're always writing for some audience, right? There's always someone else in that transaction. I suppose people write in their diaries for no one to ever read, but most of the time when we write things, we want someone somewhere to read them eventually. So it's always about communication, and the editor's job is really to help the writer make sure that they've communicated the thing that they want to communicate. So yeah, that's my answer there.
Edith, when you're planning and then you're pulling your ideas together, would that be something done kind of almost in like a terse, a short form, and later on kind of flesh things out once you know you have the order that you want and yeah.
I think one of the greatest things invented, and I'm not even sure I know the word for it, it's the non-outline outline, where you don't worry about like A, B, sub-level 1, 2, 3. You just write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down. These are the things I want to put in, or these are the things I want to talk about. And sometimes just that lets you put them on the page and step back and you say, oh, look, this one up here actually connects to this one down here. Let me put these two together, and these things, or, this item is more important than that. Let me move it to some other place. So yeah, I think that's a very useful tool for that. I would say the bigger the thing you're writing, the more you have to kind of make this a process, right? If it's a little email, you can do the whole thing in your head, boom. If it's a 30-page paper, you're going to want to kind of do it in different iterations. And I was going to say one more thing, but I forgot what it is. So keep going. I'll remember.
I remember some class I was taking, and the instructor talked about the phrase, why this now? like your audience, you can't. So what do you think of that approach? Why should I read this now?
So this comes down really to the question of why a person writes. And if you're, or you can, if you're an artist, right? The difference between art and business writing, I like to say, is that the artist kind of throws something out there and they want a response. They want an emotional response, but they're not trying to get you to go buy a car or to take any particular action. Almost all other kinds of writing are ultimately kind of aimed at persuading somebody to do something at some point. So you ask yourself, am I writing something that's meant to advocate a particular action by a particular group of people? And the answer to that is yes. Then you have a whole process of saying, okay, who is this audience I want to reach? What's going to move them? And this, when you're talking about what are the pieces that go in, I'm not thinking what are the pieces that interest me. It's the pieces that move my audience. And it might be very different from the pieces that would move me. So who's my audience and how am I going to move them to do whatever it is, versus let me see if I can write something that's so powerful and sad that I can make people cry. Like I want people to feel something really deep when they see this or read it or whatever it is. So it's a little bit of a choice how much you want to make your analysis about targeting what you write to a particular reader versus expressing something that you want to express.
So do you really say that to writers when they come to you? Like, do you have, you've handed me this piece, does it have all the ingredients, if you will, in it?
Oh, I look at piece. Well, so if a writer sends me a piece, sort of fresh off the cuff, the question is first, what's it about? And then have they made a persuasive case, or have they told me a persuasive story? And by persuasive, I don't mean move me to action, meaning that the whole thing fits together as a narrative of something that happened,
Okay.
right? Is there a gap in that? Like, why didn't they interview the cop? Because do you know what I mean? Sometimes there's just a hole in the story. So that's what I'm looking for, holes in the story, saying I feel like there's, a connection between this part and this part that's missing, and you have to fill that in for the reader.
Edith, do you have to have a target audience in mind when you start writing? Or can you just be writing, I don't know, to write or to share an idea and then see how it lands?
Totally, 100%. That is art.
Mm-hmm.
You express what comes out of your soul and put it out there, and it finds an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Or, and maybe, I mean, that's why, people say some artists really become famous, not because they found a good agent, a good, what do you call them, gallery dealer who loved them, who really promoted their work. And there can be great artists who don't get promoted, not because they're not great artists, but because they don't get enough exposure for the message to reach that many people. But I think that is certainly kind of the purest form of human expression, whether it's through words or through dance or whatever it is. I will point out two common problems with process, and one was getting started. We talked a little bit about that with the lead. So if you're stuck getting started, you write that kind of very blunt summary statement, and then you just take it from there and then come back and see what has emerged from your writing. The other thing that I notice a lot, and I say this to tune everybody into it, it's very, 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 very common for writers to spend anywhere from 2 sentences to 3 paragraphs kind of warming up that if you look at what they've written with the practice eye, there's this kind of intro, and that if you just really cut the first 2 paragraphs off, there's a really powerful beginning down around paragraph 2 or 3. So that's something, again, when you edit yourself, or when you go to someone and ask them to read it for you, you know, tell them, I don't want to know about the typos. Don't tell me about the grammar errors. Tell me which parts are interesting, which parts are compelling, which parts move you, and which parts kind of fall flat. And that ultimately will be more useful information at that stage. Diane, did you say something?
I said I'm big on the old warming up. I have a
Yes.
tendency to have a long wind.
Someone asked, what am I working on now? So my project now, I have a full-time job as a magazine editor at a place called Global Finance, based in the city. And my big side project now is I'm working with something called the Long Island Media Task Force, and we do presentations on media literacy. I'm a big defender of the First Amendment. So journalism, media history, we have guest speakers, we send films. But the big thing I've been working on lately is my presentation on the First Amendment, which I'm very much looking forward to delivering. So thank you for asking.
Oh, I guess Laura has her hand up.
Yes, hi everybody. I apologize. I'm not on the camera because I just took a shower and I have my house coat on, but I don't look ready for the screen.
You're among
But
friends,
welcome.
Laura.
Completely forgiven, yes.
Thank you, thank you. I have a very interesting question. My background is mostly in theater, and I've written some plays and directed and so on and so forth. I do currently handle social media for the library to some extent. I don't do all the writing, but some of it. And I find myself writing these days mostly in short parses, very small amounts. And my focus and my energy is very disjointed when it comes to moving a lot of information very quickly. I even find myself, when I'm reading a book now, my mind has to read the sentence 2 or 3 times just to kind of remember what I'm reading. Now, yes, I am getting older. I'm in my 50s, but I'm, you know, I'm willing to take that on. But I actually see my eyes kind of going left to right as if I was scanning the screen. So it's very interesting because I'm currently, thanks to Diane, considering writing a memoir with my cousin, my first cousin, who was teaching English in high school in North Carolina. And yes, it's pretty exciting. So this is something I've been inspired. So thank you, Diane and Heidi. Say she is mulatto, and I am seen by the world as white, even though I'm mixed. And we're looking to write a memoir about our life story together. And one of the things we are presently confronted with is, how do we write a book where I'm not misappropriating something in the area of equity and diversity? There's sort of, we're not nervous per se, but where do we go and explore what is okay to write in this moment? Even though the book probably would take us a couple of years, but I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
So that's a really, people always say that's a great question. It's not a great question, it's a tough question. I mean, it's a great question, it's a tough question. And I don't know that I have a very good answer to it. I think it's important to always be as thoughtful as possible about these issues. And, you know, certainly so in journalism, whenever we start anything, it's like, check the clips. Basically, go see what's been done already. Go see what's been done, what's passed the test, what's okay. Go see what people are writing in the same vein, in shorter formats, in blogs and places like that. And that will certainly give you a beat on that. And then I could put you in touch with someone who is, she's somewhere in the color spectrum, who is a literary agent and knows a lot about who was a literary agent and an author for many years and knows a lot about various things along those lines. If you want to connect with me kind of afterwards through email.
Great, thank you so much. I
Be in
appreciate
touch with
that.
her. Yeah, no, it sounds like an interesting project, and those things are challenging, but there too, I would encourage you not to let yourself be held up by that, and to put out what you want to put out, put it down on paper, and then you edit, right? That's what editing is all about. It's a chance to step back and think again and look at it again and say, is this really okay? And maybe have someone else look at it and is this okay? But I wouldn't want you to let that block you from starting, because ultimately, if that's your story, those are the issues that you're working through, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Really is,
Yeah.
It's I can share a beautiful story with you. In the early 20s, I was in New York and we were spending a weekend together to enjoy New York City. And we were getting ready in the bathroom, and she started crying a bit. And I was like, Christine, what's wrong? And after a few minutes, she expressed to me that her skin was getting lighter. She has red hair. She's what they call high yellow.
Uh-huh.
And she identifies, but as she was expressing to me that her skin was getting lighter, she was crying. And it was the first time in our journey as God's sisters and first cousins that I even thought twice about how and who she was beyond skin color, like as skin color. And that was a pivotal moment in our relationship. Wow, so she really opened my eyes, and our journey since then has been quite interesting. We share very intimate stories about identity, love, family, how we identify, and how we've made our way in the world. And we haven't also ruled out maybe doing a fiction of some sort instead of, but I still think that might be even more difficult to take.
Well, you know what? It's both more freedom and freedom can be scary and difficult, right? I don't know if you ever watched Project Runway. I'm a huge fan of all the kind of creative shows. But if you've ever watched it, they tell them, oh, go make a dress out of nuts and bolts. And everybody's like, oh my God, but then they do something amazing. Or, go make your dresses out of mud and grass. Oh my God. But then they're like, go make any dress that you want out of anything that you want. And everybody's like, huh. And people so a lot of times really having some kind of format, having some kind of rigidity, having some kind of limitation is helpful. And so fiction can potentially be like so wide open, it would kind of shut you down.
Great, thank you so much. I'll keep you guys posted.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds great, Laura.
So
it's 7:24. I think that let's see, what does Heidi Schwab say? This has been very interesting. Thank you both so much. You are so welcome. So before I let you wrap up, Edith, I do want to say that I will include information like your media literacy project on a resource sheet. And if you look in the chat, I have, see it says bit.ly.raiseyourvoices, and also on the Hoboken Public Library site, but this has everything in one place. So that is available to you. Final thoughts, Edith?
Oh, just thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to meet you, Lenore, and Heidi and Laura as well. So good luck to everybody in their writing and their reading and surviving lockdown and every other crazy thing that's happening. So
and thank you, Edith.
This week is week 2, and we called it Grammar School, and there's a bonus track on that URL, and it's with Jasmine Simpson, who's a Robert Wood Johnson University nurse, and she talks about nursing and storytelling and inspiration. And next week we're going to have storytellers and dreamers, and that's young women speak. So join us for that. On the 29th, we have Make Yourself Famous with personal branding experts and discussing about book publicizing, etc. But again, I want to thank the library for allowing me to host this and say thank you very much. And I'm going to turn off the recording and I'll stick around.
Okay.